people of color express much less anger than their white counterparts over the same kind of political objects, whether it's reflecting on elections that didn't turn out the way they want, reflecting on the out partisan or the kind of things that they identify like polarization or specific policies. So this runs in stark contrast, at least in the case of African Americans, right, to that very pervasive stereotype of the angry Black person. So not only are people of color expressing less anger, but anger is much less mobilizing of political behavior for people of color than it is for white Americans. And so when we see white Americans expressing anger over politics across the ideological spectrum, they're more likely to act on that anger, to go to the voting booth or donate to candidates, canvass for candidates, but also to contact elected officials, work with community members, protest and boycott. In contrast, when Black and Latinx and Asian Americans express anger over politics, they're not anywhere near to the degree of their white counterparts more likely to vote or canvass or donate, not any more likely to contact officials. They are more likely to protest and boycott. And so I think we see that play out, right, with a long history of activism from groups of color. What is that representing? That's representing people of color's anger being directed not towards a particular regime within a system or a particular kind of party platform, but at the system itself, a system that they fundamentally believe is not responsive to their interests. And so anger is a palpable force, not only for getting people active in politics, but for making them double down on what their existing ideas are. And so I see that doubling down effect in 2020. So why is it important for us to distinguish anxiety versus anger? Because you have to understand the object of that anger. The idea was people are anxious because the economy is unsettling and maybe white Americans feel that the kind of ground is shifting beneath their feet for a bit. And Trump represents kind of an assuring force, right? That they will not lose their dominant status within politics and within society. But if we think about that kind of relationship to that sense of lost status, not as I'm afraid about it, let me speak slower, but I'm more angry about it, we kind of understand the way in which our politics is very much determined by kind of in groups versus out groups. And so if we thought, okay, people see some kind of promise represented by Trump in 2016, but 4 years later, they're going to maybe come to their senses or not see Trump as living up to that promise and seeing the divisiveness and seeing the toll of COVID, seeing kind of the loss of the US standing in the world. There's this maybe expectation that was not founded that white Americans, maybe specifically white women, would move away from Trump. But what did Trump very effectively do throughout those 4 years? Continue to engender and activate that sense of anger. And so that anger, again, causes people to double down. And so even if people can be dissatisfied over the last 4 years, Trump and the media's ecosystem around him continually gave them outlets for that anger that were directed away from Trump. And so that's really important for us to understand. Why is that really critical? Because there's almost a sense that, well, people might regret their vote choice in 2016 or regret not voting in 2016. And why might not people regret that? There is a great deal of normalization of Trump and of Trump voters. We can consider how important it is that there were so many very intensive efforts to create these profiles of Trump voters that were often very sympathetic, right? Very understanding. And these come from an authentic place. People not understanding how so many people could support Trump and trying to understand that. But that has a process of normalizing and legitimizing the grievances that people acted on as they voted for Trump. And so when 2020 comes around, I think this bears out, more people that were probably on the fence in 2016 felt they could comfortably cast that vote in 2020. Why? Because, well, he's been normalized and kind of the ethos or the mythos of Trump supporters has been normalized. So it's really important for us to think about not just the kind of divisiveness that has been accelerated by Trump, but how those dividing lines, particularly of race, but also of gender and religion and socioeconomic status, are definitive elements of our politics, not just defining the divide between left and right, but even defining the divide within the Democratic faction as well.